Good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Bill Williams from the Influencers Podcast, coming to you live from Atlanta, Georgia. And today it's Friday. We're just ready for the weekend. And I want to start off today with a good friend as an interview on the Influencer Podcast. I first met our guest 22 years ago. She was actually a patient in my dental office when we first came to Swanee. And as I have told you in the past, I started over at age 48, moved to Swanee, and the rest is history. We had a very great practice, fine run for 23 years. And now as a podcast host for the Influencer Podcast, I get to look back and pick out the best of the best. And one of the most interesting and fun patients I ever had during that 23 years here in Swanee was a lady named Leslie Tentler, and she's going to be our guest today. So I want to bring her on right now. Say welcome. Hello, Leslie.
Hi. Hello, everyone.
So good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Now, we go back a long way, and you were sitting in the dental chair one day, and our topic got turned to being an author of a book, and I had just written my first book. I think the one that I published and went to bestseller on Amazon about dental practice. And you said, I'm an author too. So tell us about that conversation, if you remember.
Yeah, I believe I do. You were talking about your book, and I hadn't really told a lot of people that I had just signed a contract for a 3-book deal with a publisher in New York. And I kind of didn't want to say it out loud because it made it real. But when you mentioned that, I had to blurt it out. So I think you're probably one of the first people outside my husband who knew about it, because at that point it wasn't out. None of the books were out yet, and I was still in the writing and contractual phase.
And that's super that I was one of the first, because as soon as I heard about it, I said, I've got to read Leslie's book. And I think this was the first book. Is that?
Mm-hmm. That was the first one.
Midnight Caller. And so you did the trilogy and another trilogy and another single, and now you're quite famous published author. There's a whole lot of accolades that you've had, which we can talk about later. But I want you to kind of describe where you were, what happened, and what job were you doing at the time that you decided to become an author?
Okay. Well, I've always worked professionally as a writer. Right out of college, I started working for a public relations firm in downtown Atlanta, and I was senior writer there. I've continued, even while doing books, to work in senior writer editorial capacities. I'm currently vice president of content for a marketing and PR company here in Atlanta. But, that's not really the type of writing. While it pays the bills, it's not really the type of writing I wanted to do. It was always a dream to try to write fiction. And at one point, I just decided I'm going to make the time and do it. And that's what I did.
Well, when you put your pen to paper and you start to put together your thoughts, I know it didn't always work out that your first thought became the book. So kind of tell us about what happened to get started, and how many tries did it take you to find a publisher? It's kind of like might not be a great failure, but we always like to hear you don't always get there on the first try, right?
Right. Well, I do think I was a few steps ahead of a lot of would-be publicists in that I have always written professionally. But when I started writing fiction, it's a totally different beast. And I joined a writers group here in the Metro Atlanta area called Georgia Romance Writers. Started attending there, learning some of the mechanics of the business of writing, not so much the writing itself. I was very fortunate in that I do hear stories about people taking years to find an agent, to get published. That happened pretty quickly for me. In fact, probably a little too quickly, because I wasn't really expecting it. I thought I would just go and maybe write one book for a small publisher and try it out. And I ended up getting an agent pretty quickly, and she sold a 3-book deal. At that point, I had 1 book written. I wasn't really sure. I wanted to dive in by contract with 2 more, but she kind of told me there wasn't an option. So that's what I did.
So the failure was not a big failure. It was basically just getting into the trilogy, the 3-book deal before you really wanted to.
Yeah, and I do see that as a failure. In some ways, I think it would have been better had I had to work a little longer to get to there, just because of the fact that I don't think I was ready for it. And looking back, there's some things I think I should have handled a little bit differently and a little bit better. And a lot of that stemmed from not being prepared. So I do see that as sort of a failure wrapped in the success of getting published.
Now, if you watch other people in the book club, if you watch other people in the writers club, and there are steps to get to success in being an author, can you kind of identify where people have stumbling blocks?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for some people, it is the fact that they're not really ready in terms of how to write a story, understanding point of view, understanding plot, understanding pacing. For a lot of people, those are things they're still trying to master. For other people, they may have that mastered, but it's kind of a huge leap to put your work out there, to put it into contests, send it to agents, because it's scary, because you are going to get rejection. And, that's a hard thing. So I do see a lot of people with a lot of talent that they sort of stumble at that point of actually getting their work out there. And then obviously the third step is, so you got the contract, can you handle that? And that's where I had more issues than, the getting there part.
So people don't have an innate ability to write. They're behind the eight ball.
Well, I don't really know the answer to that. A lot of people feel like either you can write or you can't write. Um, a lot of people feel like it's something you can learn. And I think it's kind of a combination of the two. I think you do need to have some inherent skill, but I think that skill can be honed, and I think you can make it a lot better. I know I certainly had to master that. When I started writing, one thing I didn't understand was point of view. And I did a lot of what's called head hopping. And it took me to join a writer's group to understand what head hopping was and why you did not want to do that. And you wanted to stay in one character's point of view at one time. That was like something I had to learn. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it really helps. I mean, there's a technical aspect to writing,
There
and
is.
people think if you can talk, you can write.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Yeah.
the truth is, I guess, if you can talk, a lot of people don't want to listen. So you
Hmm.
really don't want to put down on paper what you just say out loud to people
Yeah.
and call it a book.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Tell me about what motivates you internally to want to get into fiction and write stories that entertain.
Well, I kind of credit my mother with that, because she taught me from an early age how wonderful the world of fiction was, and how you could just kind of, live 100 different lives. And you didn't have to be brave. You didn't have to be the most beautiful person on the planet, but you could go live those lives if you wanted to, all through, reading books. And so she started me out very early, taking me to the library and letting me load myself down with books, or going to the secondhand bookstore. And, I remember going and getting all these books, 10 cents for $1. And I would just read all the time. And I think that's such an important aspect of becoming a writer, is you have to be a reader first. And so much of what you learn in terms of how to write is what you've absorbed from reading so many different authors over the years.
That sounds good. It mirrors my childhood, where I got all the James Bond books when I was like 12 years old and started reading Goldeneye and all the things that he wrote,
Yeah.
Ian Fleming. So, yeah, I was a real fan of reading early, and I believe that's what
Yeah.
everyone should be doing.
Yeah.
And the lost art that they're
Mhm.
stuck to their iPhones now and social media, where they really should be reading books.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I know for me, I first got hooked by Nancy Drew books. I'm showing my age, but this was back in the day when there would be two published per month, and they would show up at my local Kmart. I'm from a small town. And, I'd be there on that day of the month every year, because there were two new Nancy Drew books, and I would be there with my mom to get those books. So, you kind of, you find what you like, whether it's James Bond or Nancy Drew or Louis L'Amour. But so many writers got first attracted in that way.
Oh yeah, I was Hardy Boys and Tom Terrific.
No, I don't know Tom Terrific, but I do know the Hardy Boys. I read those as well.
Yep. So here's a question: what are your top three success secrets that others can model from in creating a book, one that sells actually?
Okay. First of all, understand what's selling in the market. There's a time and place for different things. Like domestic thrillers were very, very popular, the last few years. kind of keep on top of the trends and know what you're doing. Also write to a specific genre. I write, for example, I've always written romantic suspense, and I'm not saying you can't write in other genres, but you can become much better known if you stick to one genre instead of, jumping from sci-fi to young adult to, romance. Know your genre. Biggest thing though, and to put it honestly, is butt and chair. It's just called butt and chair. And because I talk to so many people that want to write a book, they have a lot of ideas for books, but they never have the time or the discipline to just sit in front of that screen and work. And that's the number one thing. If you don't do that, it's never going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. If you're not going to put the time in to write a book, it's not going to write itself.
Right.
I remember going through a series with Isaac Asimov called the Foundation Earth series in the science fiction arena. And it's like 20 books. And I found that I enjoyed taking one author and just writing that author for 6 months, however long to finish their series, until I got to the long books like Chesapeake and Russia, the books that were, this thick, and I go, well, maybe I should just break that up a little bit.
Yeah.
So tell us about your first series, the one that was the Midnight series.
Okay. That's known
Where
as
it takes place and who is the protagonist?
the protagonist of each of those books. It's a trilogy. It's the Chasing Evil trilogy, also known as the Midnight trilogy, because each title has midnight in it. But each one, this is why you can read that trilogy out of order. Each story's separate, but the tie-in is that each book, the protagonist is an FBI agent, and they all have the same ASAC, which is the special agent in charge. So they all work for this one guy. You could kind of equate him to Charlie's Angels, I guess. So he's the only recurring character in each book, but each book is a different story about a different agent and the case that they're solving. It's romantic suspense, so there's obviously romantic elements as well. And they're all based around serial killers. That's the trilogy that I wrote and sold through a 3-book contract.
And you got first writer award for that, I understand.
Yes, for the book you just held up, Midnight Caller, I was nominated, did not win, but I was nominated for Best First Novel by International Thriller Writers at Thriller Fest in New York City. I think this was probably back in 2012.
Yeah, that was a fun read. I enjoyed it, and took place in New Orleans quite a bit, did it, or Savannah?
It was New Orleans.
And when we were reading through the books, it's like, because I've been there, I see that. And I like books that are in our region, in areas that I've traveled. So, anybody who's down in the South will enjoy your books because you write about the coastal life down in the Carolinas and Georgia, down in the Gulf Coast. Mm-hmm. So that's always been an interest in mine. So who would be the person who would want to read your books, your ideal client?
It would need to be someone who does enjoy romance, because all of my books across all 7, they do have romantic elements. It would be somebody that doesn't mind a little bit of a thrill in terms of, suspense, and some people don't like reading that kind of stuff, and so they do have suspenseful elements. My first trilogy, the Chasing Evil trilogy, is much more suspenseful because it is about serial killers and that kind of stuff. I do have a second trilogy that focuses, as you mentioned, on a innkeeper and his family in a fictional South Carolina town. It does have suspense and romantic elements, but it definitely is down a few levels in terms of the violence or anything like that. It's a much softer read. It's not quite as the Chasing Evil trilogy is. So if you like that, but maybe you're not sure you want to read about serial killers, I would recommend what's known as the Rarity Cove trilogy.
Yeah, I enjoyed both series, and I felt like I was really there in the second trilogy. I was there on the Carolina coast, and I was living the life, and it was natural. It was very fun. So I think you impressed me. I was not expecting that good from a new author. I have to tell you, I knew you were a quality person, but I didn't know you could write that well. So I
Well,
think all
thank
the
you.
awards that you were nominated and won
Mhm,
were earned. So
mhm,
hey, everybody out there should be looking for your books to kind of get through the end of the summer here. We got just a little time left to go.
mhm.
Um, you want to name the other books so that people get a sense of which ones to look for?
Sure. And if you'd like to read about each of the books, you can go to my website because I do have a description of each book and kind of a little synopsis of what it's about. But my website is www.leslietentler.com. My last name is spelled T as in Tom, Entler, leslietentler.com. My first trilogy, as we've discussed, is the Chasing Evil trilogy, and it is Midnight Caller, Midnight Fear, and Edge of Midnight. They're all set in areas of the South. Um, my second trilogy is the Rarity Cove series, and that is Before the Storm, Low Tide, and In Dark Water. That's the one about the innkeeper's family in the fictional town outside of Charleston. I do have a standalone as well, which is another serial killer romantic suspense. That's a standalone, which means it's not part of either one of these series. And it is called Fallen, set in Atlanta. And it is not about FBI agents, but it is about a homicide detective and his ex-wife in Atlanta, who is an ER doctor at the fictional version of a hospital here in Atlanta.
Okay, there you have it. And LeslieTentler.com is where you can read about them. And I thought that would be fun for people to be able to jump in there. And you started 12 years ago on this project,
Mm-hmm.
12, 13 years ago. So 7 books in 13 years, that's a pretty good pace.
Yeah, it was a lot faster at the beginning because, as I mentioned, I spent a lot of time on that first book, Midnight Caller. I was trying to teach myself as I wrote it, and took a lot of time. And I did get an agent pretty quickly, and she sold the book, and she said, "Do you have anything else written?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Oh, well, they want 3 books." And what I found out was they wanted a book every 6 months, which it took me about 2 years to write the first one. So that, was kind of a feat for me. That's one of the reasons I mentioned I got really nervous and wasn't sure if I could do it because it was a very fast pace. After that, I did take a little break and didn't have quite the pace with the next 4, but I still did 7 books between 2012 and 2018.
Now, do you like to write your books out by hand and paper, or do you type them into your computer?
No, I do everything on the keyboard. I'm a very fast typist and could not imagine writing it out longhand. I know a lot of people do that, but I'm not one of them. Everything is on screen.
Yeah, professional. Yeah, that makes sense.
Hmm.
A lot of people think with their pen
Hmm.
and they don't think with their fingers.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. But just the fact that I worked professionally as a writer in the business world for, 25 years, I've been very acquainted with computers for a long time as part of my work. In fact, I worked on the first Mac computers that didn't even have hard drives. You put everything on a floppy disk and took it in and out at the end of the day and, took it home with you. And, so I've been working with computers for a long time. That's my comfort level.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Is there a platform that writers use that you prefer to kind of organize your book on? Anything particular?
I'm not one of those people. I tend to just use Microsoft Word, good old Microsoft Word, but a lot of writers talk about Scrivener. It's very helpful to them. I've tried it, doesn't work for me. It just depends on how your brain works. But, if you're one of these people who want a tool to help you writing, I would recommend looking at Scrivener just because of its popularity. But again, I really just, to me, Microsoft Word is the equivalent of a notebook. It's just I'm not writing by pen, I'm writing by hand. I mean, by the keyboard.
Okay. Now, let's kind of talk about the reader and how they would experience reading one of your books. What do you include in the manuscript that really grabs people? You got an award-winning book, so there's got to be elements of it that some people don't get in to their books. What do
Mhm.
you feel like are the things that really make yours stand out?
I've always tried to include an emotional element. I mean, these are romantic suspense books, but, in fact, I was told by a few agents early on that my characters had too much baggage. I personally like to read stuff like that. So I tend to have characters who do have a lot of history and baggage. Usually they're battling something internally, in addition to whatever the external battle is. That's kind of where I reside in terms of writing my stuff. There's always, for example, with Fallen, which is my standalone, just kind of give you a little bit of insight into it. It's about a homicide detective in Atlanta and his ex-wife, and they ended up getting divorced because of a family tragedy. They still care about each other, but they just did not survive the tragedy. So while there's a serial killer investigation going on, you're also kind of getting some insight into what happened and the aftermath of that terrible accident that really split them up.
I notice when we watch TV programs these days, there's always a subplot that is a family drama on top of the external trauma. And it's like, to me, I always think they're trying to hook a different audience.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got competing elements within one show.
Oh, yeah.
And my personality is I want to know the facts and just the facts. Let's get to the end of the mystery.
Yeah.
And so some people will be attracted to one of the stories, and the others will be hung on to the other story. I want to know why grandma has got this thing going on,
Right. No, and that is, a method that people do to try to hook as many writers. And I'll give you an example. I'm not a science fiction person. I don't really read it, don't care for it. However, I love the television show Farscape, and I loved Battlestar Galactica. But I watched those not for the science fiction stuff, but because of the emotional and human stories that were going on as subplots. That's what I cared about. It did not matter to me that it took place on a different planet or anything like that.
Yeah. And I recognize that writers that are professional put things in there to attract more audience. So It's true. I'm glad you brought that up. People are always wondering what puts a book into the limelight. And I think that's part of it. So thanks for sharing that. Tell us more about personally, what are you grateful for today, Leslie?
Well, at my age, I'm in my 50s at this point. I'm very grateful for my health, very grateful for my husband and his health. And to be honest, very grateful that we're getting closer to retirement age.
Hey, it's great. I have to tell you, I just went there,
Mm-hmm.
You don't see me around the dental office anymore.
No, unfortunately, no, we don't. We miss you. But I'm looking forward to retirement. And when I say retirement, I mean retirement from business writing. I'll probably still be working on fiction, probably more so than I am at the moment.
I would love to keep up with that. I always need something good to read, and I've run out currently. Ready for something new.
Yeah.
How do you start your day getting going every day?
I'm widely known as someone you don't talk to until I've had at least one cup of coffee. I'm very grouchy in the morning.
There you go.
Yep. So I get up early. I try to get up before my husband at least 45 minutes early so I can sit and have my coffee. And I like to watch old-fashioned television news and just kind of catch up on the news while I'm drinking my coffee. That's how I start every morning.
Oh, boy. Listen to the news every morning. Boy,
I do.
That's tough.
Sometimes you don't want to hear it, but I do listen to it. And then I also am a big proponent of walking, and I walk every morning. I just actually came in from walking before I talked to you, even in this heat. I was out, walking and getting that done. But that's the other part of my morning routine.
Oh, good. Well, I tend to get out and go walking about 7 to 8 o'clock. That's my normal.
Me too.
So, yeah. Maybe we'll run across each other on the pass because we do live near each other, I'm sure.
I'm surprised. I don't know. I go to that park that's near your house. That's off of Lawrenceville Swanee Road. I go over there. So, yeah, Sims. Yeah, I go to Sims and walk over there.
Sims Lake is a number 2 place. I go to one off Moore Road most of the times.
Okay.
Yeah, Sims Lake's wonderful.
Yeah, we go over there quite a bit.
Now, this is a crazy question because you've already achieved, I think, the goal. But if you couldn't be a writer, what would you be? What would you feel like?
If I had everything to do over, I wish I had gone further in college. I have a bachelor's degree. I wish I had become a college professor, gotten my PhD, and I think that would have been a very good career for me. I think I would be very suited for it. And that's one of my biggest regrets, is that I didn't know that at the point that I was at the age that I was going to school. But looking back, if I could do something over, I would have probably had that career path.
Yeah. Well, I would call your life a success, but there's always that one little thing in the back of your mind, I wish I had.
Yeah, that's the one for me.
So if you're overcoming a challenge, what do you do to make it happen?
To steal from Taylor Swift, I'd have to say, shake it off. I don't let myself stick around at the pity party very long. I roll up my sleeves and I start over. I try not to focus too much on failures. And some people will look at your life and go, well, you don't have any failures, that's successful. But I could tell you how many failures I've had between, 6 o'clock this morning and right now. So I'm very aware of them. But everybody perceives that differently. But yeah, I try to just do my best every day. That's all anybody can do, and not give up, not let something just hit you to the point and you say, that's it, I'm done. You have to keep going.
I gotcha. Now, do you have a plan for another series or another book that's in your mind right now?
I do have a plan for another book. I'm not sure if it's a series. Have not really had time to work on it yet, but I do have a plan for it. And if it ever comes to fruition, I'm planning to set it in East Tennessee, which is where I'm from. Kind of had an idea for this for a number of years and just haven't had the time to focus on it. But that's my plan if I can get to that.
Oh, yeah, you got to write about Tennessee.
Yeah.
Now, here's a question I've always wondered, because I write books also, but I'm a total amateur. I feel like I just kind of write what I'm thinking, and I don't have a structure that much. But tell us, how do you decide to outline a book? Do you actually come up with the ending of where you want it to end before you start, and you kind of outline the pieces of the puzzle, the characters, the plot? What's the first, second, third things that happen?
Well, in fiction, there's basically two types of writers. There's the plotters, that they plot out everything. And some people it's chapter to chapter. Some people it's, paragraph to paragraph, where the book's basically written. They just need to add some words in. There's another type of writer that's called a pantster, which means seat of your pants. And unfortunately, I'm that type of writer. I would like to be a plotter, but I just have a general idea like, hey, why don't we have an FBI agent and have him chasing a serial killer that thinks he's a vampire in New Orleans? That's all I've got. And I'll just sit down and start working with that. I generally don't know where it's going beyond the next chapter or two, which is one reason I'm a slower writer. I think when you write by outline, you can write a lot faster, but it just doesn't work for me. My brain doesn't work that way. And I have to just kind of let my characters develop them and kind of see where they're taking me next. So it's a little bit of a surprise for me when I write, because I don't really know where things are going. I don't recommend that for everyone, but that's just how my brain works.
So that's really an eye-opener for many people that you just shared. What is a pantster? Writing by the seat of your pants. And it's kind of like you're experiencing your book like you experience your life. You don't know what's coming tomorrow, but you go through it and you write it in your diary what you did. In your case, you're pretty much inventing the story new every day.
Yep, absolutely. And I don't recommend it if you have the option of being an outlining type person, but I have tried the outlining, and without having the emotions and the character depth, I just can't put together an action only outline, because I really write more from the character than I do from the action. It's probably a reason I'm not a big action movie type person. It just doesn't interest me. I have to know, the story behind the person. I have to connect with them to write.
One of my techniques for writing when I was putting together my books, I was on vacation when I did have time to put a butt in the seat and not do other things that were calling me, like pulling teeth. Writing is not like pulling teeth, I have to tell you.
It kind of is like pulling teeth.
Depends on how you are trained. If you're good to pull teeth, it's a lot faster to pull teeth than it is to write.
Right.
But I understand. If if I would have a place where I was going to write a chapter, I would pray about it
Mhm.
and sleep on it, and I'd wake up with the answer.
Mhm.
And so I wrote many of my chapters based on just asking, what's the next thing going to be about? Who's going to be talked about? What's the topic? And
Yeah.
they would pop into my mind, and I would just sit there and start writing, and it would just flow.
Yeah.
So I got into the flow, and you probably did the same thing. You thought about it the night before, slept on it, and then got up and started writing.
Right. I think your subconscious really comes into play there, that, even when you're sleeping or you're showering or whatever you're doing, I think your brain's working on these puzzles even when you don't realize it. And sometimes you need that time away, to let your subconscious kind of, go through the pile of stuff to say, this works, this doesn't work. I've had that happen where I've just said, it'll be 10 o'clock at night. And I'm like, I can't write. I'm not doing this. Forget it. I'll, go to bed. I'll get up the next morning. I'll go for a walk. And then all of a sudden I've got an idea. So sometimes you just need that time away.
Hey, let's bring Robert into the story, your husband.
Okay.
How did he support you? And you were talking about doing some serious writing, and you've done some serious writing. So how did you convince him to go along with that?
Well, I mean, I guess I could credit him with having written the books, because when all this stuff started, the reason was because I became a tennis widow. He joined Atlanta Lawn Tennis Association and became obsessed with playing tennis. So I suddenly found myself having a lot of free time, because he wasn't here. He was on the tennis court all the time. And I thought, well, I might as well write a book. I always talked about wanting to do it, never had the time. I have the time. So that's how all this started. And I think he was really surprised because he wasn't really paying attention to what I was doing. And I came in and said, hey, I got an agent. And he was like, oh, okay, what's an agent? He didn't even know. And, I explained to him, and he said, oh, okay. And then I said, hey, the agent sold a book and she wants 3. And he was very proud and I think very surprised, but he was all in. It was a little bit of a risk because unless you become, the next Stephen King makes a whole lot of money, but 98% of writers, you don't make that much, especially when you're starting out. And at that point, I was making really good money writing professionally for marketing firms, and I had to kind of take a step back from that to fulfill the contracts. But he was completely in on it. We knew it was a bit of a risk, but he said, I was having cold feet, and he said, if you don't do this, you're going to question it the rest of your life, and so you need to do that. So that's why I did it, because I was ready to talk myself out of it.
Yeah, interesting.
Mhm.
It's good to have a Robert in your family.
Yeah, he's all in very easily, much more so than me. I'm kind of the naysayer in the background saying, but what if, and he tends to charge into things.
Yeah. Well, my rock is Sheila. You know her, and she definitely had my back when I was doing all my extracurricular traveling around the world, trying to do businesses and write books and do the things, teach other dentists. So I've always been a multiple career type person myself. I know how you feel. It's real fulfilling to get something out and people like it and they enjoy it.
Mhm.
So it's worth it, I think. So
I do.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah. I think it's Dorothy Parker that said, I hate writing. I love having written. And that's the way I feel. I never enjoy it when I'm doing it. In fact, I have a lot of self-doubt, and I'll say, oh, this is terrible. Why am I doing this? But once you get the book out and people are reading it and you're getting emails from people, and obviously, if it entertained them for a few hours, if it, took them away from whatever, problems they're dealing with, it's really worth it in the long run.
Absolutely. Well, let me ask you about how you got your book sold and marketed. Did you ever go through any paid digital medias, any advertising on Facebook, Google, and such?
With my first books, I did have a hired publicist. This is old school, not digital. I did have a hired publicist. I used him for 2 books in the first series. Did find that successful. Did not move forward. It was fairly expensive, and I wasn't sure while it was successful that it was worth what I was putting into it. I did with my second series. I did use Facebook ads. I've never been really into the whole digital thing, but I did use Facebook ads with the Rarity Cove trilogy. And I did think that I got a bump from those. I'm probably not the best case study because I did not go. I've heard a lot of people putting huge amounts into that, and I just never did. I really, kind of kept it. When a book came out, I would do maybe 4 or 5 Facebook ads.
Hmm. Well, I remember that I kind of went through a similar thing with my books. The first one, I kind of handed it off to a publisher, and he kind of guided me through the whole thing. And then the second book, I kind of knew the ropes, and so I did it almost all myself.
Mhm.
And I still hired somebody to proof it and not to edit it, but certainly you learn a lot by going through it. And you shouldn't do it by yourself the first time.
Mhm. Yeah, there's classes and all kinds of things just on digital media. It's very elaborate. It's definitely an art to learn, what to spend, where, and how. And there's a lot of testing involved in it. Um, that would be my one recommendation if you're going to do it is, to start out small and test it, and make a determination if you're going to grow that part of that, or if it's not working, then try a different approach with it. But that's such a part. It's not just these days, it's not just how good a writer are you, it's also how good a marketer are you, and that's a big part of it.
Yeah, that's something worth repeating. It's not how good a writer you are, it's how good a marketer you are
Yeah,
often that makes the success. It's nice to have that monthly check coming in from the sale of books, though, isn't it?
it is, and I'm still getting that, even though I haven't published anything new in a few years. It's nice getting those checks. I'm getting checks from traditional publishing, I'm getting checks from indie publishing, and I'm also getting some checks from audiobook, which I have also sold audio rights as well as some foreign rights. So I'm getting, a series of those. It's nice. It's residual income that, I worked a lot for when I was doing it, but, it's still coming in as passive income, which is very nice.
Now, you spoke about foreign rights. Do you have your book into several languages now?
I do. I do. The first 3 books that were with a traditional publisher in New York, they kept my foreign language rights. So they did publish it in multiple languages. I'm thinking it might be 8 or 10. It was always interesting because they never told me where it was going to be published. And I would just get these big boxes showing up at my door. And I'd open the box and it would be my books written in a different language. So I'd have to go use a translator tool to figure out what country's language this was. But yeah, they're in quite a few languages. One of my books that I indie published, I did keep the subrights and I sold subrights to Japan. A Japanese publisher approached me about Before the Storm. So it is available in Japanese. And I have sold either through my traditional publisher or through myself, I've sold subrights on audio for all 7 books.
Now, I get calls all the time, people wanting to do my books in foreign languages, and I say, no, I'm not interested. But what's involved in getting a book turned into another language? Is it just the same issue? Just have somebody?
I don't really know the specifics behind it because since I'm selling the rights, the purchaser of the rights does all the work. What my assumption is that they have a translator who, they pay to basically translate the book, because I don't speak that language. I have no way of knowing how good a job it is. But, that's really my only involvement is they say, "Hey, we want to buy the book." And I say, "Okay." And they pay me for it. And then, I would assume the next step is they have a translator come in and do the work after that.
And how lucrative is it compared to doing the books here in English in the United States? Does it pay well to do a foreign language translation?
I think it depends on the author and the subject matter. I think that some genres sell better in foreign markets than others do. So it really just depends. Like science fiction may sell better in certain countries and not so well in other countries. So it's a hard question to answer because I think it's so specific to the genre that you're selling in. It also has a lot to do with the purchaser of the rights, how heavily invested they are in marketing, because a lot of traditional publishers these days, they will purchase a book, but they don't do any marketing for it. So, that's something a lot of writers don't realize, that most of the marketing is left up to them. They're not, getting, they're not getting a lot of marketing support.
Yeah, that's something that bears repeating for the audience is that a lot of times you can have a publisher charge you to publish your book, but they don't market it for you. So basically they're making money on the publishing They're not selling the book for you to make the money. You're paying them a lot of times.
Yeah, or you're paying a publicist. I've hired a publicist before, had one for a while, or you're doing it yourself, and that does take a lot of time. Or a lot of times I would have a digital book tour. So you would hire these companies that they go and take your book around to all these blogs that review books. And, there's a lot of different ways in addition to digital marketing to, promote your book. There's book signings, there's, lots of stuff like that, lots of different ways to do it. You just have to decide. I think also there's kind of a saying that money should flow to the writer and not away from. So I think if you're looking at a lot of things that they're expecting you to pay for it, and I'm talking about the publishing aspect, then, you should be a little bit wary of those things. You should really look into them and be careful, as opposed to saying, oh, this person wants me to pay to get my book published. I'd look and make sure that you know what you're getting into.
Yep. Vanity Publishing, they want you to pay.
They want you to pay. That's vanity publishing. There used to just be, there was two ways to get published. There was traditional publishing, which is with the big publishers or small press. And then there's vanity publishing. There's now self-publishing or indie publishing, which, has really become extremely popular over the last few years, where you're managing it yourself. You are paying an editor, you are paying an illustrator for the cover, you are, paying for book formatting. And I have done that. I have, when I did do some indie publishing, I wanted my books to be as professional as when they were published with a large publisher. So I went out and found the best editors, and I found the best illustrators, and, kind of brought a team together to develop it. But that does take another hat and a lot of work. That's aside from just writing. So these days, especially when you're writing, there's so much more than just the writing. There's the whole business behind it, which is a requirement to be successful.
I think the audience just learned a little bit right there. They can pass that on. Yeah. Hey, Leslie, you say you're in your 50s.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back, you already told us you would go ahead for your doctorate, your PhD. So what other advice would you give that 20-year-old self when you're saying, Leslie, here's what I want you to do with the rest of your life?
Other than that different direction and career path, if I was going to write fiction again, I would tell my younger self to start much earlier. I do think that traditional publishing especially has become much more competitive. And with the addition of small presses and indie publishing, just the publishing market has become so much more competitive. There's more platforms out there. There's more people publishing in different ways. So there's a lot more competition out there than I think there was 20 years ago in terms of making a name for yourself and getting that traction. There's so many more books. There's so many more authors and choices that readers can make than there was, 20 years ago. So I would have probably told myself to stop dreaming and get started earlier, but that required my husband to start playing tennis, as I mentioned. So had he done that earlier, I would have started writing earlier, I think.
Yeah, I myself always wanted to be an author and a writer, and I always said, I'm going to write a book. But it took me till I was over 50 to start. So, sometimes people don't start early enough.
It's hard too, because when you're younger, at least for me personally, all my time was around, earning money and, making those payments, the house payment and the car payment. And you really don't have time to think about what do I want to do? What fulfills me? So it kind of takes till you get a certain age that you're like, okay, I've got a little bit more freedom now to pursue some things that are of interest to me. So it is hard because you want to do it. And I talk to so many people that will tell me, oh, I want to be a writer, or I have this great idea for a book. But, you got to really, like I said, button chair, you got to sit there and do it. Just talking about it isn't going to make it happen. And that's the hard part, because you kind of live in uncertainty for, weeks to months to years while you're working on this thing that you don't know how it's going to get traction in the market. You don't know how it's going to be accepted. And that is scary. And you do have a lot of moments of doubt, like, how bad is this? Is this really bad? And I will write, some days I'll write and I'll say, oh, that was really good. And the next day I'll write and think, boy, that's terrible. You ought to just throw that out and, give it up, go do something else. It's very hard.
I'm a pack rat. I save stuff forever. I get attached to it. And if I write something, I would have a hard time throwing out a whole chapter, for instance, and starting over. Did you ever do that?
I did on my third book in the Chasing Evil trilogy, because I was on such tight deadlines with the publisher. I started that book and I could just tell it wasn't going right. There was something wrong. I just could not figure it out. And I just about had a nervous breakdown, because I was like, I can't figure out, have I lost it already? I just can't write this third book. But I realized I had started at the wrong point in the story, and I needed to start at a whole different story, which meant that I had to lose about 5 chapters I had written. But once I did that, and it hurt, once I did that, the story started flowing and I was able to get through. But I think it's Stephen King that has a saying called "kill your darlings." And that's really sometimes what you have to do. As much as you love what you wrote, if it's not helping the story move forward, you have to just let it go.
It's kind of like breaking up with a boyfriend, huh?
Yep.
You got to let him go.
Yeah.
Tell us about your living mentor. Do you have anybody that has impacted your life?
At the current time, I really don't have a mentor. I do know when I was trying to get published, and I was a member of Georgia Romance Writers, there were multiple published authors there that were so helpful to me. They shared insights about the publishing process. They talked me off a ledge when, I had something happen with an editor changing. My editor left at one point and I had a brand new editor, which is kind of like what you never want to happen. And that happened to me with my first book. So I did have mentors at that point in my career that were so helpful that I felt like I could call up and say, okay, this happened. What do I do?
Yeah, I can relate. I can relate. Tell me, why is it important for you to be impactful now?
I think that's just human nature. I think, we're all here on this planet for a finite amount of time. And I think we all want to find a way to make our mark in some way so that we're not forgotten, whether that's, having a wing of a building named after us or having a dusty book on a bookshelf somewhere. I think you want to leave your mark.
My wife talks about when we downsize our house, we're going to have to build a room with shelves on 4 walls. Mm-hmm. Because we have so many books,
right?
So many genres of books. I've got my dental books, I've got my science fiction books, my detective books. She's got her books. She's been a prayer minister and a Christian counselor for decades. Mm-hmm. So she's got all those, and it's like, what are we going to do with all these books? Mm-hmm. So somehow we got to start giving away books. We got to do something.
Yeah. Gonna have to give them away or build a book shed in the backyard or something.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you the question. You want to be remembered for things when it's all said and done, you're gone. What's your legacy going to be?
I don't know what my legacy will be. I hope that it will be that I'll be remembered as a good writer, an animal lover, and a kind person. I mean, those are really the 3 things that matter to me, and I think kind of hopefully describe who I am.
Well, I can attest that I think you'll make it, because from what I've read, I know that it's a joy to read your books. You're entertaining and you're insightful. It's a thrill. When it's a thriller, it's a real thriller. They're always kind of spicy, and people will love all the intrigue that's built into your book. So how can we support you? Give us the website once again.
Oh, absolutely. Visit my website, www.leslietentler.com. It's got all my books listed. There's links directly to where you can buy them. My first books, that is the Chasing Evil trilogy, they're no longer in print. So yeah, that's no longer in print, but you can buy them as a Kindle ebook still. My other books, the other 4 books, you can buy through Amazon either as paperback or as an ebook, and they're all available on audio. Everything's available audio.
Yeah, we didn't talk much about audio, so mention that a minute. What do you think is the market going towards? More audio, more Kindle, more hardback and soft cover?
I definitely think ebooks are here to stay, but I think paperbacks are here to stay too. I think it's just another reading option. So I think both those formats are here, and I think audiobooks are only going to increase in popularity. I know that's where I am doing the best right now is in audio. And I think with people's busy schedules and, the fact that everybody's got devices they can listen on now, I think that, audio is definitely a very, very popular trend that's here to stay.
Yeah, here's my dilemma. I prefer the book,
A
definitely,
lot of people do.
over the ebook.
Mhm.
I mean, I had a Kindle, that was the black and white Kindle that you could read it outside.
Mhm.
I love that because I could read it, and I can't read my iPhone
Mhm.
outside. It gets
Right.
too dark.
Mhm.
So I like the flexibility of both.
Mhm. Right.
But I've become a real fan of podcasts.
Uh-huh.
And an audiobook is like a podcast
Mhm.
in terms of you can put it on your device and go.
Yeah.
And I enjoy walking in the park. And if I'm walking solo, I don't want to walk and just have my thoughts to myself all the
Yeah.
time. I want to learn something or be entertained. So I think an audiobook, walking and doing exercise,
Yeah.
can't be beat.
Me too. I agree that I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to a lot of audiobooks.
Well, that's very good insightfulness on the audio and where it's going. So
Mhm.
maybe I'll put my books into audio next.
Yes, you should.
What would you say about your guest experience on the show?
It's been great. It's always wonderful talking to you, Dr. Williams. You're one of my favorite people, and I don't get to see you in the dentist office anymore, so I'm very glad to see you today.
Are you a lot less nervous here than you were at your first visit?
Oh, absolutely. I've gotten very used to, the process, and yeah, as you know, and I don't mind talking about it. I have a lot of anxiety issues that spill over into dental visits, spilled over into book contracts. It's just part of my life I deal with. So, yeah, it is much better at the office that you created just because they're very understanding of people who have a little bit of a tendency toward, looking at worst case scenarios of what could happen. And, yeah, but yeah, that's something that I deal with, when we're talking about failures early on. Usually most of my failures go back related to anxiety and kind of chickening out on things.
Yeah, I have to say, all the 47 years of dealing with the people that I dealt with, one of my best qualities was listening and understanding
Mhm.
the fears people had.
Yeah.
And I was able to overcome 99% of the people's fears by just listening and understanding. And once they knew I understood, they became half as fearful within just a minute. And
Yes, that's so important because I can't tell you how many dentists I went to before you that when I would tell them I was nervous, it would be met with, "Oh, why would you, that's stupid. Why would you be nervous? Or they would just ignore me and tell me, to get over it. And you were the first dentist and I don't know if you remember this, but I met you online at a forum that you were talking in a forum about dental phobias. And we started talking, and I met you online, and you had at this new office, and I told my husband, I said, I found this dentist I think might be able to treat me. And I said, but I don't know. And I met him online, and I said, will you go to the appointment with me? So he came with me to the first appointment because I wasn't sure, since I had never met a dentist online and not in person. But it really saved my life, literally, in terms of, finding someone who could treat me without all of my worries and anxiety having to keep me from getting treatment.
it must have been a dental dating app.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Yeah. I don't even remember the forum, but I met you on there because you were on there answering questions about dental phobia. And you said, well, I have an office near you. Do you want to come in for a visit? And I was like, well,
What
okay.
year was that? Probably 1998, 99?
Something like that, probably.
Yeah, that's about the time I was doing the forums. I've forgotten about that. That's a great story. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let you have the final word and just speak to the audience and just kind of talk about what you want to, and then I'll come back at the end. Okay.
Okay. For anyone listening who has always had a dream of writing a book, I would say, definitely pursue it. I would recommend that you join a writers group. There's lots of them around. Just do a little searching online, and you can find there's online writers groups. There's in-person writing groups that run out of libraries. There's associations such as Georgia Romance Writers that I've mentioned. It's so important to get to know other writers and to learn from them as you're trying to kind of explore this new realm of what you want to do with your life. And so I would recommend reaching out to those groups. It's invaluable experience. I would also recommend entering contests. It can be hard because you can get some criticism that can be tough to take, but it's how you learn and it's how you grow. But those would be my recommendations, is just get out there and do it. Don't dream about it, or don't write the manuscript and hide it under your bed. Get it out there and get criticism on it so you can learn from it and take it to the next level.
There you have it. Leslie Tentler, really fine artist, a fine author of many books, and she's right here in Suwanee, Georgia, one of my friends. So what better way to start a Friday morning going into the weekend than having a sit down with a good friend. So I want to invite all of you guys who are listening to click on the QR code right to my I'm always pointing to the wrong side.
There you go. Yeah.
It leads to my digital business card. So if you want to be interviewed by me on the Influencers Podcast, there's a chance you can get in there and have some fun talking about your passion. And we're interested in what you're passionate about. So that's how you get there. You can also, on that same card, you can find out about this YouTube. And if you go to that YouTube, you will find some amazing things. So I want to invite you there. The thing that I'm doing now that I've retired from dentistry is I'm sharing about, I think something's going to change the world. Leslie, I don't know if we've talked much about it, but there's softwares out there. There's IT technology in the AI range that's going to absolutely tie everything together in one unified package. So I've been promoting Onpassive for 3 years now, talking about it's coming, and it's finally come. It has finally arrived, and we have tremendous success with our technology now. And I want everybody to try it out for free. And if you go here to this otrim.co, Dr. Bill W., then you'll actually be able to jump in there and get a free trial of everything. And a lot of it's free for life. You can get OMail, ONet, OTrim for free. And then you have other products. We're going to set the world free. We're going to have a lot of income opportunities for everybody. And so if you're interested in having a substantial income for the next 20 years, look into this right now, and you will find something that will answer every question you've ever had about what can I do to earn money over the next 10, 20, 30 years without having to lift your finger. So that's kind of where we are with that. I wanted to share that with everybody. Leslie, thanks for being on the show, and let's get together and walk and talk about writing books again one day.
Sounds great. Anytime. Thank you, Dr. Williams.
Thanks, Leslie. See you guys on the Influencers Podcast. See you down in Suwanee later on, Leslie.
Bye.
Bye-bye.